Thank you, Life Lounge, for having me this morning. It's great to be with you all. Before I get started, I would love to invite you to participate in an activity. You okay with that? So go ahead and stand if the following statement is true for you. So you can remain seated. Sorry, you remain seated. If the statement is true for you, go ahead and stand. Okay? First statement. My recreational activities are reduced due to smartphone use. Go ahead and stand. No one? Okay. A couple people. Tim standing, double stand. Go and stand if I use my smartphone for a longer period of time and spend more money than I intended. Okay, online shopping, nobody does this? Like you're on Amazon and you're like, just add that to the cart, it's not a big deal. Okay, grab a seat. Because of my smartphone, my sleep quality and total sleep time has decreased. Nobody. Two honest people. Nobody else goes to sleep with their phone right next to them. You guys are great. You guys are on it. I feel restless and irritable when my smartphone is unavailable. Okay, now you guys are just, maybe you haven't had enough coffee, because the reality is, I know this is true for you, right? Okay, last question. I was told more than once that I spend too much time on my smartphone. Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing. These 5 statements all come from a smartphone addiction inventory assessment, a self-administered screening tool to investigate your smartphone usage. Now, when I first read these 5 statements, I thought to myself, I'm never taking this assessment because it's too real, right? It's too intimate for me. And so for the remainder of my talk, I'd like to invite you to participate in something. One more thing. Go ahead and grab your smartphone. Grab it from your purse or from your wallet or from your pocket, and grab it, turn it on silence or do not disturb if you haven't already, and put it underneath your seat. Put it underneath your seat. For the remainder of my talk, I want you to keep it there. And if you have an urge to reach for it, I want you to ask yourself, why am I doing it? Is it because you're anxious about the email you're trying to respond to? Maybe you're worried about your kid trying to text you? Or maybe he's just doing it simply out of habit. Some of you might feel like this with your smartphone underneath your seat, right? A little worried. Or maybe like Oprah, she's just like, I'm not into this right now. So thank you for participating. We've got 15 minutes left, and that's all you need it for. Cybernetic organism. Cybernetic organism was a term that was used in the 1960s in science fiction films to describe the interaction between technology and humans. Cyborg for short. When we hear the word cyborg, we often think to ourselves, RoboCop, Terminator. Exactly, that's what I was thinking. But the reality is, cyborg is a term that's used to describe our interaction with technology. I was first introduced to this when I heard an interview of a lady named Amber Case. Amber Case is a cyborg anthropologist. And what she does is she thinks about technology and human interaction. When I first heard her title, I thought to myself, there's no way this is a real thing. Maybe she's a science fiction novelist. But the reality is, she actually studies technology and humans and how it affects culture. So as an organizational consultant and an aspiring cyborg psychologist, I too am fascinated by the interaction between the human psyche, technology, and the workplace. In a recent workshop I presented, I asked 3 questions to emerging professionals. Number 1, what's one word to describe your relationship with time? Number 2, if you had more time, what would you do with it? And number 3, what gets in the way of your productivity? And the answers to the first 2 questions were varied. They were what you would expect. But for question number 3, a majority of these professionals said the number 1 thing that gets in the way of their productivity is their smartphone or distractions. The very thing that promises us productivity and efficiency is the thing that's getting in the way of it. Some researchers describe this reality, that our smartphone is the 3rd most important survival tool in the 21st century, next to our keys and our wallets. I threw this picture in there because some would say lattes as well, right? But the reality is we can't live without it. And I would say that in the next few years, our wallets and our keys might become obsolete. Amazon just released something where they can walk into your car without a key. It's called Amazon Key. Quite interesting, isn't it? And how many have Apple Pay or Google Pay? And you've utilized that service before. Our smartphones are becoming indispensable. Some researchers even say that our evolution is from Homo sapiens to Homo smartphonians. So why does this matter to me? A lot of you might be thinking, Danny, you're a millennial. You have lived with a smartphone. You grew up with it. Your life is better. Relax, right? But here's a reality. In a recent book called iGen, Dr. Jean Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Diego State University, right here in our backyard, she describes what the next generation is like. Her research is quite fascinating. And this is how she describes who iGen is, the next generation after millennials. Number one, they were born after 1985. They grew up with a cell phone, had Instagram before high school, and most importantly, my favorite, don't remember a time before the internet. How many of you remember that tiny little sign, America Online, right? Dial up. Now I'm old enough to understand that too, right? In her research, she draws from 4 nationally representative surveys over 11 million people from 1960 till today. In her research, she describes 10 trends for the iGen generation. Okay? One of the things that she says is that in the happiness rate in 2012, she began to see a decline. Secondly, 31% of 8th and 10th graders felt lonelier between 2015 and 2011. These are just small statistics that she gives throughout her book, and I think it's quite fascinating. And there's a surprising correlation between when the smartphone was introduced and our happiness, anxiety, and loneliness.
In the world or in the USA?
This is the US right now. Her research isn't in the US. How many of you remember this? Yeah. WALL-E. The summer of 2008, I'll never forget the first time I saw this. I was transported to another reality. If you remember, WALL-E describes a scenario where the world has become decimated. It's a wasteland. So WALL-E is short for Waste Allocation Load Lifter Earth Class. And humans have been transported to space. And this is what they look like. How many of this kind of looks semi-similar? This is in 2008, mind you, right? They have all these screens right in front of them, and the people that they talk to, they look at their screen in order to talk to them. And the irony of this is that WALL-E, this robot that says one word, WALL-E, is the only character in the entire film that displays human characteristics. It's quite ironic, and it's quite sad. This is what Tim Cook says, the CEO of Apple. He says, "I'm not worried about artificial intelligence giving computers the ability to think like humans. I'm more concerned about people thinking like computers." So for the remainder of my talk, I want to give you 3 tips on how we can turn our digital devices into developmental tools. Number 1, create awareness. The other day, I got to talk to my dad. He's a pediatrician for over 30 years. And I asked him, I said, "Dad, I'm doing some research on smartphone addiction, and there's a lot of inventories that are being used for adolescents." So I thought to myself, "Dad, do you see these kids as they come into your doctor's office, and are they glued to their smartphones?" He paused for a moment, and he said, "Danny, actually, it's not the kids. It's the parents." Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to the doctor's office with my kids aren't going there just to hang out with my dad. I mean, he's a cool guy and all. But the reality is you're probably there because you need a physical, a vaccination, or you're sick. And yet, the challenge of it is we feel so disconnected from the very people we love. One blogger says this, Courtney Carver, she says, "Paying attention to people you love is 2% effort and 98% just putting your phone down." Isn't that true? Isn't that true? So how am I doing this in my own life? I recently downloaded this app called Moment. It's from a developer in Philadelphia. I'm trying to get a hold of him, so if he's out there listening to this talk, I hope he can reach out to me. But he does some really interesting research, and this is actually my feed of my screen. So I'm getting a little vulnerable here. And what Moment does is it captures every single minute that you're on your phone and gives you information on which apps you use the most. Okay? So this is mine. Unfortunately, I spent 26 minutes on average on Instagram. I use it for work, so it's okay. But that's a little bit about my feed. One of the really neat features is there's automatic notifications that you can set up. So every 15 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes, it tells you you've spent this many minutes on your phone. It's a reminder for me to become more aware. Check out this trend. This is time spent per day with smartphone devices in the US. In 2008, the average American was spending 18 minutes per day on their smartphone. In 2018, 3.5 hours on their smartphone. Me, 2 hours and 39 minutes on average this last month. Not super happy about it, but I would say I'm not addicted to my smartphone either. I use my smartphone a lot for work, for connecting with people. And so what I'm not trying to say is let's just throw out the smartphone altogether, but in reality, we want to have a better awareness of how much we're using and what we're using it for. Number 2, develop daily habits. In psychology, there's a term called behavioral architecture, where we maximize our space in order to minimize our distractions. So take, for example, you're trying to lose weight. You don't want a box of donuts right next to your desk. That doesn't make sense, right? You would think to yourself, that's ridiculous. Why would I have a box of donuts on my desk? And in that same way, the question I would ask you is your smartphone getting in the way of your productivity? Because if it is, if it's right here next to you, and it's blinking and buzzing and vibrating all sorts of times, it might be distracting you from your productivity. So I'm going to argue that we need technological architecture. Before you go to bed, you might consider leaving it in a different room. Before you go to dinner with your loved ones, you may consider just leaving your phone inside your car. Some of you might get anxious by that. You don't have to take a picture of everything. And finally, if you're going to the doctor's office with your child, you might just take out your phone and give it to your child. They might do a better job at paying attention to the doctor than we might. There's a great website called humanetech.com. The Center for Humane Technology is founded by a man named Tristan Harris, and he's a former Google ethicist, and he has some really great research. And one of the things that you might be able to find here at humanetech.com is a couple different things. Number 1, they say turn off all notifications, go grayscale, and use your home screen for simply the tools that you need the most, rather than being infiltrated by all sorts of information and media. How do we have a life well lived? We become more focused, and we start to put aside the clutter and the technology mess in our world. One of the ways that I'm using my device as a development tool is I download this app called Calm. Some of you might be familiar with it, but it's a daily meditation app, and I take about 10 minutes a day every single morning, and I turn on. For some of you might be thinking, that's weird, but I take the thing that's distracting me and I've turned it into a development tool. Literally, I use it in order to harness the power of my own mindfulness. Finally, engage in meaningful connections. There was a study that was published in 2012 where 2 psychologists, they wanted to see the impact of the mere presence of a smartphone. So what they did was they asked 2 complete strangers, they said, go grab a booth, we give you 10 minutes, and in that booth, the only thing that they had was a table with 2 items on it. Number 1 was a book and a notepad. The other group, the test group, had a book and a smartphone, which was not theirs. At the end of their research, they determined that the groups with the smartphone being present lowered the relational connection and closeness. And they continue to do different studies with that. How am I doing this? The other night, I invited some friends over to my house. I'm really fun. Researchers are boring, actually, right? And I asked them, I said, hey, I'm doing some research. And if you tell them you're doing research, sometimes they'll do it. I said, I'm doing some research. Would you mind taking out your phone, much like I asked you to do just a minute ago, and put it in a basket and write one word to describe how you feel putting your phone in? Without my prompting, within 20 minutes, my friends started asking me about my research. And in that moment, the rest of the dinner party, really fun party, right? The rest of the dinner party, no one was on their phone, and we began to have really healthy dialogues. One of my friends said, you know what, my manager, when I have one-on-ones with her, it's only every other week, she's on her phone while I'm talking with her. Now think to yourself, you might be that manager, right? When you have a constant buzz, an email coming through, something else, oh, hold on one sec, right? How does that communicate our desire to be connected with that person? Secondly, another friend of mine, he works at a large biotech company, and he was walking around campus during lunchtime, and you know what he said? He said, not a single person was talking to each other. They were all glued to their smartphone. So this problem really isn't just for adolescents, is it? It's for us humans. It's for us adults. Smartphones, the reason why they're so alluring is they give us the illusion that we can be everywhere, when in reality, we're nowhere. We're not even present with the very people that we're here, the people that are next to us. In a recent film just put out, based on a science fiction novel, there's a dystopia. And the dystopia is, there's a virtual reality world. Some of you might be familiar with this. It's Ready Player One. It's placed in 2045. And the creator, James Halliday, he created this virtual reality world called Oasis, where people literally go and live. They create their own personality. They could be whoever they want to be. But listen to what he says at the very end, as he passes away, he says this: "I created the oasis because I never felt at home in the real world. I didn't know how to connect with the people there. I was afraid for all of my life, right up until I knew it was ending. That was when I realized, as terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness, because reality is real." I wonder if in our attempt to be faster, smarter, to go further, to look better, we're actually getting slower, more fatigued, and at the end of the day, less connected to the people we love the most. A few years ago, when I started my dissertation process and my doctoral journey, I had a conversation with a college student at Point Loma Nazarene University. She was a junior at that time, and I told her about what I'm doing. She said, "Danny, tell me more about your research." And I said, "One of the things I'm doing is I'm actually leaving my smartphone out of my bedroom when I go to bed, because guess what I'm doing? I'm looking at my emails, I'm looking at news feeds, I'm looking at Twitter, I'm looking at Instagram as I go to bed, and guess what I do when I wake up? I get an email from my boss, and I'm working before I even get out of bed." And I'll never forget the look on her eyes and what she told me that day. She said, "Danny, I don't know how you do that. That seems impossible." For the people who are coming behind us, what kind of legacy do we want to leave? Do we want to be more disconnected with the illusion that we're connecting with everybody else in the world without the people right in front of us? Or do we want to be people who are fully alive and fully engaged with the people right in front of us? I want to leave you with this one final thought. How might we harness the power of technology, cultivate it, foster it, develop it, use it, without sacrificing our humanity? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.